We have some more GME chatter and game theory going on. So we'll go over all the catalysts going on right now. The spike to 115, and I'm sure you were very happy today until we saw the inevitable drop back down. So Justin, let's go back into the news.
Absolutely. So there's four things that kind of struck me as interesting today. First one was screenshots posted by multiple people showing GME trading around 200, close to open or right after open earlier today. So I don't quite know what to make of that, but what I would note is this: a company like Schwab or Fidelity or Vanguard, a large institutional broker with complex systems, these people, the mistakes that they make tend to be very complex mistakes. In other words, it's a combination of things where people aren't paying attention. It's not just, generally not just, the computer picked a number or pulled a number out of its ass. Like, no, it doesn't work like that. The way I think about it, or excuse me, the way I like to think about it, because this confirms my own biases, so one should always be cautious about this, is that it goes back to the idea that there's a lot of, I don't want to say shenanigans, but there's a lot of effort being put into control the price of certain equities, GME being one of them. Every now and then, the various mechanisms that control or that otherwise help manage the price and therefore manage the perception, sometimes they have cracks, sometimes the mask will slip off a little bit, whatever. My guess, or the way I like to think about it, is this was one of those things. Alternatively, perhaps, the Schwab computers just decided to pull 200 out of their ass this morning.
Yeah, Justin, I'm not sure how to discount this or what to really think of it. It was only Schwab that did it. I don't have a real opinion on it. There are some things in the news today that I do think are very important, but that's just kind of on the sidelines. Let's go into the next story. So the second thing in the news today is this is all pure game theory. No one actually knows, but this is speculation, something that I've really been thinking about. We see these what look like margin calls going back a few days. You see Netflix, a few other companies that are just down like 20% after hours, and you say, well, Netflix tanked on earnings. No, they didn't. They were flat. They were just down 0.05% from expectations. It was just a flat earnings. And for after hour moves of 20%, we see Microsoft, Tesla right now just tanking after hours. It just looks like a firm could be blowing up. That is just like Archegos. You see one of these firms, they start getting margin called, they just liquidate their positions. Then there's some chatter, some guys that I really trust, like Andy Costan, who are saying, well, he has guys on the ground in Asia saying that this morning, which is tomorrow morning, Thursday, January 27th, margin calls are up 20x at 20x time. This could just all be the markets crashing, but it also, on our own biases, could be GME. I mean, if all these firms really are as short as we think they possibly could be, then these margin calls would make sense. And this is something that we've been waiting for. And it would just be a few days until quote unquote MOAS happens. But that is only if our biases are correct.
Yeah. And one of the things too, I would say is I try not to put dates on various things. Like if people want me to throw out a date, I'm going to throw out February 16th because it's the next full moon. And why not? If you're going to pull something out of your backside, well, that's what I'm pulling out of my backside. But
future.
Yeah, esoteric nonsense, aside, my take on it is that if this thing, when I would argue this thing actually happens, it's not happening in a vacuum. And there's going to be a bunch of second and third order knockoff effects. Just a really, really, really fancy way of saying, if you have, let's say, the primary villains, who I would argue are going to be the sophisticated players who in bad faith intentionally went short on GameStop or on a variety of stocks, GameStop being the most notable one, and then did everything in their power to hide or otherwise warehouse this short position without having to report it. Yeah, they might have been complying with the rules, but they certainly weren't complying with the spirit of the law, whatever. So if you have these companies, and let's say these companies have to scramble for collateral, have to post collateral in order to maintain their margin. So in other words, they get like a quasi-margin call. It's not like, hey, we're liquidating you. It's like, hey, listen, we're getting kind of close to the limit, and we don't like that. We need to just a little bit more to put in. Okay, great. So they might post collateral. But what's also interesting, too, is crypto is, at least when I last checked, crypto is relatively down.
This is just all things that you would see in a market crash. Like this could just be the start of a market crash. And just like Archegos, there could just be firms that just blow up, and that is absolutely possible. But it also could be related to GME, and that's what we're getting at.
Yeah, and then what it also might be too is that like when GME, when the exotic transactions required or the margin requirements for these exotic transactions to otherwise hide the short position of GME, if they need more and more collateral posted, and the collateral that's posted has gone down and down and down, whether it's crypto, whether it's stocks, whatever, right? You have this problem where it's not necessarily like GME that's causing it, but rather it's the other mechanisms that were put in to support these what I believe to be exotic transactions in otherwise, and that's the problem right there. It's not happening in a vacuum. Even if
Yeah.
it's not a first order effect, it's going to be a second or third order
So
effect.
this is the next thing is I think could be the biggest news, and this is not
Yeah.
this is there's only one person that we've seen this on Reddit, but there was someone who was on Interactive Brokers and tried to direct register a share, and there was I'll put it up on the screen right here that they just said that we're sorry, we're not going to take it. And if
Yeah.
it is the case, this would the real theory behind it would be okay. Well, there's no actual shares left, and the probabilities that are very low. But me and Justin are going to test this tomorrow by direct registering a share to see if we can actually go through. Because if we don't, if they say the same thing and we're on two different firms, they're fucked. And that's the simple case. Like it would be game over, and the game would stop, as Justin likes to think about it.
Yeah, he's just like the name.
But
And the other
one person that tried it, and who knows how to discount that? It could be Photoshop. There's absolutely no proof, but this one person. So me and Justin are both going to try it tomorrow.
Yeah, so there's two things that immediately come to mind on this front. And number one, I think back to a video that Gammon did, a week and a half ago, talking about what constrains the commercial banking system. And it's the fact that they might have to cough up an asset that they otherwise can't conjure out of thin air. Directly registering shares, at least in theory, and I believe this theory to be correct, forces the bank, that is the DTs, the people who might be issuing IOU GME shares, to actually take, you cash in the IOU and say, nope, whatever, take it back. I want the real share. I want it registered in my name. Theoretically, there's only so many shares that exist that can have this, that can be directly registered. And if you start running low and you keep having these requests coming in, you will have an issue. So very curious to see on that front. And much like the Schwab thing, and much like a few of the other things we've mentioned here too, what I find fascinating, it's not so much like an individual story, because I think, okay, well, yeah, there might be a glitch in the system. Maybe, Susie didn't, close out the file right the other, or whatever, right? There's a whole host of reasons why I couldn't go through. But what I find strange is the amount of irregularities that keep coming and coming. And it's always the same problem, children. I mean, smoke, fire.
Yeah, this is what really gets me, is there's just so many things being thrown out there. Like, you don't know, this is everything you have to take extremely skeptical and see where you're wrong. But there's just so many things that all just are screaming like something is going down. You don't know what's going down, but you put a few pieces together and it makes sense. Yeah. And this comes to the fourth, is the Russia-Ukraine geopolitical deal, where Justin can give a lot more thoughts on than I.
Yes, so I put this one up here, not that I have any particular special insight or news on it, rather just to say that the vibe that I get is that the market is on the precipice. It's just waiting for an excuse for something to happen. And the reason I note the Russia-Ukraine thing is I think back to when LTCM blew up, and what actually blew up LTCM, well, it started in Asia, ironically enough, but the actual event that kicked it off,
what potentially just got 20x margin called this morning, but that is pure just, but it's going word of mouth, but it's a trusted word of mouth.
Yeah.
Credible source.
So in 98, well, so the crisis started in 97, I believe, but ultimately by the time 98, the crisis had reverberated to Russia. And what Russia did is that Russia defaulted on their own bonds. This is very unusual because the Russian government had the money printer, and they theoretically could have just, settled the bonds with printing up, their version of bank reserves or whatever, right, and bring it onto the central bank's balance sheet. But they chose not to do that. Rather, they chose to default. This is what blew up LTCM, because LTCM had assumed, and it's not that they were stupid. It's just that they trusted themselves too much. They assumed that, no sovereign would ever default internally on their bonds because they had the power of the printing press, but Russia did. And that basically screwed up the model. When the LTCM model got screwed up, you had this massive amount of counterparty risk that was going through the system. And ultimately, LTCM was intertwined with everyone else. And as Jim Rickards will say, Wall Street didn't bail out LTCM, Wall Street bailed out itself. When I think about the various regulators that exist right now and the other entities that will probably come into play for bailing out GME, one of the criticisms that I've heard that I'm most impressed with is, hey, listen, Justin, yeah, okay, you you make a good point, and you articulate your thoughts, and we, we can see the case you've laid out. But even if you're correct about everything, the government's not going to let it happen, or the powers that be aren't going to let it happen, or something, or they'll run out of money, whatever. And when I step back and think about it, I think back to the story of 1998, and I suspect one of the strongest counter arguments for the government, or say maybe the Fed, standing up and backing up the DFMUs, whatever they're called, the direct or the designated financial market utilities, such as the DTCC, OCC, whatever, is that they want to bail out themselves. It's not so much that they want to bail out GME. It's just that they know that if they don't bail out the system to save, or at least to try to look like they're trying to save everyone else in the market, they'll be held to pay. So anyways, I just kind of throw that out there just to say it's something I'm keeping an eye on. No special insight, but I kind of note the similarities to, or what
Yeah.
feel like the similarities to 98.
And I see those same similarities, but you're going back. We had the first crisis in LTCM where it was okay. Why would a country ever default on the bonds? They literally have a printing press. It mathematically does not make sense. Then we have 2008 mortgage-backed securities. They're the same thing as T-bills. They're pristine collateral. They're not they're never going to go down. It doesn't happen. It never has. It never will. Now the same thing could happen in the market today, where everyone is just as Justin always would say, is that the signals that we're looking at, yes, they could be signals, but what if the signals are just wrong? And what if these market makers, their math makes sense, but they discount something that just completely blows up, and it could completely destroy the financial system.
Yeah. To set it another way, the people like, the Citadels or whatever, right? Or I should call it names. The sophisticated market makers who might be acting in bad faith. These people are very, very smart and never think that they're not. But being smart doesn't necessarily mean that you're wise. And sometimes one can be too smart for their own good. So wisdom and knowledge.
Yeah, so this is just some of the news going on. There's just more and more smoke building up. Like, it looks like, when you first start lighting a fire and you start blowing on the smoke to create the fire, that's what's happening right now. There's a lot of blowing going on in the fire. It looks like we're seeing some sparks. And we saw it today with some early price action that was driven back down. Who knows what's going to happen?
Yeah, up 17%. It's funny how oftentimes 17 that number comes up, but coincidences, I'm sure. Up and then back down. So
She shall see you later.